Welcome back to the Recovery Channel in week 4 of our video series on recovering from addiction. Please subscribe using the link in the lower right corner of the screen. This week, we'll wrap up step 1 and talk about exactly what it means to be powerless. And as always, I'll be giving you a tool for recovery at the end of the video. Hopefully by now, you've got your list of affirmations and you're reading those every morning. If not, I want to remind you, you have to do the work for this to work. Remember, trust the process. Did you write that down? Trust the process. As I touched on in week 2, the idea that we are powerless and our lives are unmanageable is a non-starter for a lot of people. The human ego and even our instinct to survive give us the need to feel like we're in control of things. It is extremely uncomfortable to even imagine that we are powerless, especially over our own lives. And our first reaction to that idea is to say, no way, not me. So let's set some context as to what powerlessness means in the realm of recovery. It's important because one of the keys to recovery is recognizing that we need help and asking for it. In fact, a well-known therapist in the field told me that once we have some sobriety, forgetting our powerlessness is one of the main reasons we relapse. We won't do well if we're holding on to our own will. I ask that for the next 10 minutes, you set aside any skepticism and just roll with me for a bit. 10 minutes. You got this. We are powerless over our behavior because we can't stop doing what we know to be harmful to us and the ones we love. We are powerless because when that temptation comes on, we cannot resist it. We are powerless because when that critical decision point comes, even though we know what would be better for us, we choose the addiction. Our lives are unmanageable because the addiction is dictating what happens, not sound judgment, and it's causing problems. As strange as it sounds, admitting we are powerless is the first step in regaining control of our lives. We need to recognize that the addiction is an extremely powerful force, and we cannot defeat it through sheer will. We can try that, and we may have some success, but ultimately it will prevail because of the issues that cause the addiction in the first place. Admitting powerlessness is necessary because in our humility, we can accept help from others and from a power greater than ourselves. Unfortunately, our human nature has this thing called the ego that wants us to believe that we are all-powerful and can do anything, that there is no power greater than ourselves. We have a very hard time believing that anything, especially some glitch in our own mind, has control over us. But think about it. If it were that easy to stop the addiction, don't you think you would have by now? There is no shame in powerlessness. It is a simple fact that we have very little control over the world, whether we accept it or not. Try stopping a wave in the ocean or making the rain stop. That may sound silly, but we have just about as much success at controlling other things. That's why the serenity prayer starts with, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. The list of things I can control is pretty short. I have found through a lot of experience that the harder I try to control things, the more miserable I am. The more I can let go and accept reality, the more content I am. So yes, step 1 is to admit that you are powerless over your addiction. I was so powerless over my addiction that I needed to go to rehab. I spent $25,000 to learn what I'm about to tell you, and I won't even charge you for it. Are you ready? It's not your fault that you're an addict. It's not your fault. One of the greatest enemies to recovery is shame. The shame cycle, which we'll talk about more in step 5, keeps us stuck in a dark cloud of self-hate and self-pity that makes us want to numb the pain. So we numb the pain with our addiction, and guess what? We feel shame. And so the cycle continues. Understanding that the addiction is not our fault, we can start to relieve ourselves of the shame and break out of the cycle. What do I mean that it's not your fault? The CDC and Kaiser Permanente did a study involving over 17,000 people where they asked about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. I'll call them ACEs. Then they correlated the ACE score to the occurrence of mental and physical health issues. Here are the 10 categories of ACEs. Take a look at these and score 1 for any of these that you experienced. I know emotional abuse and neglect are hard to put a score to, but just think about things like if your dad ever told you he loved you. Were you constantly compared to others? Did your parents show up to your school events? Was what you did ever enough in their eyes, or did they always point out what you could have done better? Did you feel loved just because, or did you have to prove yourself in order to be shown love? Were your emotions validated, or were you shamed for them? Validation sounds like, ouch, that looks like it hurt, you okay? Versus shaming, which sounds like, stop crying, you little wuss. These other categories are a little more straightforward. Personally, I think sexual abuse should score as a 3. That's a nasty one in terms of what it does to a person's mental health. Okay, so tally up your score. I've provided a link in the comments to the detailed analysis of the results, but to summarize, if you score a 4 or more, you are 7.5 times more likely to be an alcoholic than someone with a low ACE score. And that's just the people that can admit they're an alcoholic. The real number is probably much higher. You're 4 times more likely to use drugs and 10 times more likely to have injected them. You're 3 times more likely to have had 50 sexual partners or more, and not surprisingly, an STD. I don't know about you, but to me, this was like a huge relief. I thought I was the most jacked up person on the planet and there was something seriously wrong with me. Turns out, for one, I'm not alone. And based on my score of 7, I was pretty much set up to be an addict. I didn't wake up one morning and say, gee, that whole addiction thing looks pretty cool. I think I'll be one. No, I was powerless over my childhood and what it did to me. And even if you didn't score high on the ACEs, I can guarantee you something happened along the way that caused the addiction. Now, this is where many of us, including me, say, dude, you're just making excuses for yourself. You have control over your decisions. And you'd be right, even if you don't sound like that. But while we're in denial, like Chris talked about last week, it's nearly impossible to make good decisions because we're not thinking straight. We're driven by the ACEs. That's why the first thing we need to do is break out of denial. Now we can see. And we can also see that being powerless is not the same as helpless. We are not helpless. You are not helpless. The second line of the Serenity Prayer is the courage to change the things I can. I talked about what you don't have control over. What you do have control over is making the next right decision. It may not be my fault that I am the way I am and I was set up to be an addict, but it is my responsibility to do something about it. Making the next right decision gets easier as you progress through the steps and start to find serenity. We're going to spend the next year working on our recovery and finding that serenity. But right now, we need to take action to get sober and stay sober. So let's make the next right decision. Today. Not after the next party or that special dinner or just one more whatever. Today. Right now. And here's how we're going to do it. This is where we introduce you to your spiritual plan of action that is an integral part of this spiritual program of action. You will add to this plan as you go, but this is where we're going to start. These tasks correspond to the recovery tools that we'll be covering over the next 2 weeks. I'm going to give you a list of 7 actions. We'll do 4 of them this week and 3 next week. 1. Find a local or online 12-step meeting. 2. Attend 90 meetings in 90 days if you're new to recovery or struggling to stay sober. 3. Distance yourself from people you act out with or who are triggering. That means cutting ties with your drinking buddies or people you do drugs with, ending any affairs, and maybe even limiting contact with family members that set you off. 4. Safeguard your house, place of work, phone, and computer. Put all the alcohol and tobacco in the house in a garbage bag and dump it somewhere away from your house. Lock down your phone and computer with protective apps. Next week, we'll talk through steps 5 through 7, which are to establish an emergency plan, to establish a daily routine, and to download a slip sheet and fill it out every time you act out. So your homework for this week is to find a meeting in your area that you can attend in person, which I highly recommend. If there isn't one, then do an online or teleconference meeting. Meetings are an important piece to this journey for several reasons. For one, it's at least 1 hour per week that we're sober. Second, we start to meet people that are of the same mindset as us and want the same thing for their lives. If we need to shed some friends because they're not healthy for us, meeting new people will be important. Third, it's a safe place to share exactly what you're struggling with and what you're feeling. For many, it's the only place they can do that safely. You'll see what I mean when you go. Finally, it's the best place to find a sponsor, which you'll be doing soon if you haven't already. If you are new to recovery or having a hard time staying sober, you need to do 90 meetings in 90 days. To do this, you may need to attend a meeting that isn't exactly what you struggle with, but they're all pretty much structured the same. I really like ACA because it deals with family dysfunction, which is at the heart of most addictions. There are links in the comments to help you find meetings in your area. The other part of your homework is to start thinking really hard about the people in your life that might keep you stuck in your addiction. It's time to get your priorities straight and start taking better care of yourself. That might mean shedding some people that you like but aren't healthy for you. Finally, if your issue involves the internet, find out whatever it is that you need to get in order to safeguard your computer, your phone, and any other devices with internet access. I like Covenant Eyes because it takes random screenshots and sends them to your accountability partner. NetNanny works too, but I've found it blocks things that I actually need access to. There are links to both of these apps in the comments. Okay, that's it for this week. I know this was a little heavy, but you know what? Recovery work is like that. I appreciate you hanging out with us, and I wish you the best in your struggles and your victories. Please subscribe below, and we'll see you next week.